Welcome to the Vanderbilt Memorial Service Against Racism. I'm Andre Churchwell, Vice Chancellor of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer for Vanderbilt University. There is no way to determine a right time for memorial service. Though the death of George Floyd may have been the recent seminal event to trigger a new set of discussions, a new set of governmental actions, both local and federal, accompanied by new protests and earnest actions at universities like Vanderbilt. Those of us of a certain age have seen, unfortunately, too many George Floyd incidents take place, each not leading to substantive deep changes in our court system or culture to extinguish racism, both personally directed and structural. Many of us believe this time appears different and appears to have more energy and certainly more allies to assist Black and brown people to work to resolve this deeply ingrained original sin of America. And sadly, we can't do enough or determine the right time to do enough memorial services because Black people and men and women, black men and women continue to be murdered in the wake of Mr. Floyd's death. Today is a day that we at Vanderbilt University feel serves as a necessary statement of what we believe regarding this fundamental American problem of racism. We have our work to do. Our younger voices, our students have offered us a charge to do more, to feel more, and act in ways that reflect Vanderbilt's commitment to eliminating racism in all of the ways it manifests itself in our community and in our Vanderbilt ecosystem. Yes, Vanderbilt is and must continue to be one of the institutions that commits itself to redevelop and fashion a road that reflects educational equity for all. We recognize that our inspiration and intent must be anchored in the humanities. It is through the window of the humanities that the best of mankind can be viewed and studied. Such is the example of Robert Frost's poetic admonition about how a road not taken can lead to a rich, fulfilled life. But we must recognize that in the context of racism, the road for many young African American children, at first viewing, may not be destined for greatness. Their road is not one paved with smoothly laid cement with 4 lanes and sidewalks. No, their road may be one of uncrushed rocks and dirt, a road covered with boulders and fallen trees, all serving as barriers as they make their way. But with the help of their family, their church, our university, and an undying commitment by their communities to work with them, they create a spirit of hope and unwavering support that our marginalized children and students will find their destinies fulfilled on their road not taken. And when they finish their journeys, we as their mentors, families, friends, educators will see the fruit of their bountiful lives, lived as doctors, presidents, scientists, artists, inventors, librarians, teachers, lawyers, all contributing to this great country. Yes, as I stated, Vanderbilt is and must be one of those institutions that deeply commits itself to redevelop and fashion that road for them, a road that does reflect educational equity for all. As President John F. Kennedy said in a speech at Amherst College in October 1962 in an event to honor Mr. Frost, he stated that Frost possessed an unsparing instinct for reality to bear on the platitudes and pieties of society. So we must, as leaders of Vanderbilt, reconcile ourselves to aspire to develop programs that address racism and all of its malevolent partners, such as contempt, hubris, and demagoguery. And in doing all of this, we can fervently state that our African American, Hispanics, and other students took the road less traveled, and this indeed has made all the difference. Our program today will consist of a prayer by Forrest Harris, Dr. Forrest Harris, Professor of Practice in the Divinity School. He'll be followed by Dr. and Provost Susan Wente, and last, our incoming Chancellor, Daniel Diermeyer, will offer closing remarks.
Let us pray. Sustainer of life, the giver of this good earth, we come before divine presence, aware of and grateful for God's unconditional love for our shared humanity. Today, we, upon a composite of the Vanderbilt University community, assembled on this hallowed ground of Kirkland Hall, admittedly with anxieties, uncertainties, and traumas in these pandemic times. Concern for social vulnerabilities, health and safety, torn as many are by the racial divide in the nation. Kirkland Hall becomes for us at this moment a sacred altar to pray for our country and university. We believe that within the economy of God, there is a balm for healing the troubling in our nation's soul. Thus, we open ourselves to sacred spiritual powers residing in the ultimacy of God, to quicken hope and deepen our resolve to press forward with the help of God, to shoulder with others the burden of transforming the world for a better life of justice for all. We mainly lift the name of George Perry Floyd. His brutal killing by a Minneapolis police officer has made visible assault against our common humanity and a global cry for justice. This cry is not new in people's weary throats of past decades to eradicate racism in all of its destructive, ruinous, and deadly forms. But this time, we thank you, O God, that the global and national mood is different in diversity of protests before our view. We share communal grief for the global victims of pandemic death and the litany of death, too many to name, due to the viral disease in this country's culture of race and police brutality. It is an insufferable double burden, weighing heavy upon our spiritual and public resources for resolution and reconciliation. These pandemics, oh God, reveal the organic racism in the nation's systems, inequities in public policies, economic and health disparities for poor Black and brown communities. But we stand in this moment of leadership transition and great possibilities for Vanderbilt University. It is not lost upon us the divine promise of shalom for all people, which touches and hovers over this land and our university. God has blessed this great university through its history and struggles against racism and justice to position itself to lead the way to goodness of justice and transformative change. We own that history and appeal to the mercies of divine grace we've known, the highest resolve in our hearts to thank you for abundant gifts that we might be transforming agents rather than silent vectors of the problem. We pray for a new Ebenezer of hope to do justice and love mercy for poor communities of the George Floyds in the world. Allow us, O God, not to become overwhelmed by the angst of fear, old narratives of separation, and many institutions' sloth to affirm the interrelatedness of our humanity. We do not wish that the babies being born today, at this very moment, will experience emotional and social pain or see racial hate we witness today. But we ask for courage to pass on to our children new ways of equality and equity and genuine community. Help us to exercise the collective agency of this university's leadership faculty, staff, and students to bring forth a new era in the womb of justice, ready to be born in the world. We truly believe this to be a zeitgeist moment of grace, a ripe mixture of crisis and opportunity to redeem the nation's soul and deepen our insights into the meaning of our university's mission and the meaning of our own lives. Holy God, so let it be. While there is still time for this generation to walk in the lighted path of love, wed to justice and compassion for the poor and our weakest citizens, dwelling in that light, we archive the memory of the suffocating cry of George Perry Floyd for breath and life. Unlike that merciless scene of death, we lament, but we thank you for breathing the virtue of justice, compassion, and new life in our hearts, awaiting that day when all flourish in the joy and justice of God's beloved community. And one day, all flesh shall see it together. Amen.
Here.
Thank you, Professor Harris, for leading us in that interfaith prayer. And thank you, Vice Chancellor Churchwell, for organizing this event. I appreciate your collaborative efforts to bring our community together, both those of us in this gathering here in Kirkland Hall, as well as all who are joining us. This gathering is meant to be one of many pressing moments and reminders that racism takes many forms. Racism led to the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, and so many other Black people at the hands of those sworn to protect us, to protect all. But we know that racism happens in smaller ways too, every day, whether in the overt moments of oppression or through more covert daily encounters of microaggressions and bias. It permeates and pollutes our society. To address the racist components of society, it's not enough to just say no to racism. We must be actively anti-racist. We cannot turn a blind eye to the atrocities that we see on a daily basis. We are required to face them head on and have difficult but necessary conversations. And we must take difficult and necessary actions. This includes recognizing the university's racist past, its mistakes, and its shortcomings. One clear example in the university's past is the name Confederate Memorial Hall, which remained on our campus for far too long. In 1933, a local chapter of the United Daughters of the Confederacy donated $50,000 toward the construction and naming of a new residence hall at then George Peabody College for teachers. That structure and the engraved Piedmont above its main entrance became part of Vanderbilt when Peabody merged with Vanderbilt in 1979. For years, the Black students who lived there and all the Black members of our communities had to live with the daily experience of seeing the Confederate name chiseled in stone, celebrating those who fought for slavery and racial segregation. The Confederate name was rightfully, physically removed in 2016 after prolonged legal battles and a subsequent settlement. But simply removing a name isn't enough. We cannot move forward as an inclusive university dedicated to bettering mankind without acknowledging our own racism and taking actions. As interim chancellor, as your provost, as a colleague, as someone passionately dedicated to fighting racism and injustice, I apologize to the cherished members of our Black community across the generations for the pain that has been inflicted. Today, we must also do more to address current racism and injustice in our society and at our university. We cannot wait for yet another tragedy for us to act together. Despite genuine efforts and progress due to many people at Vanderbilt and across our country, Black individuals still experience racism as a part of their daily lives. This should galvanize us to address head on, once and for all, and finally end this sickness. Now more than ever, we need to draw on our strengths, especially our strength as an institution of scholarship and discovery, to support our Black community and to offer meaningful ways to help one another, our university, our larger society, heal and make true change possible. Just today, I announced our newest round of trans-institutional programs and research scholar grants for 2020. One of the new TIPS grants will provide funding for the Initiative for Race Research and Transformative Justice, led by Cornelius Vanderbilt professor Richard Milner, with colleagues in Peabody, Medicine, and Divinity. I also was so pleased to announce a research scholar grant for Assistant Professor of History Brandon Beard, who will examine the formation and history of the modern African diaspora. Vice Chancellor Churchwell and Vice Provost William H. Robinson, who is also Executive Director of the Provost's Office for Inclusive Excellence, are key in leading our efforts as a community, and together they co-chair the University Diversity Council established last fall. In all of my roles at Vanderbilt, I'm committed to providing continued and additional support for the work of their offices, as well as further support for Dr. Roosevelt Noble's efforts as director of the Bishop Joseph Johnson Black Cultural Center. These acts and actions are important, and they are also just examples of what we are and must do as a university to move forward. We must work harder and faster to foster an environment where every student, faculty, and staff member experiences a strong sense of belonging and care. We know that our work is far from over. We have not done enough. These tragic killings of the last several weeks and months are not part of a self-contained chapter in our nation's history. On the contrary, they are part of a much longer narrative, one that stretches since before the founding of the United States, and some will argue perhaps throughout the history of humanity. Vanderbilt will combat racism, not just by reacting to the present moment, but by taking actions and building intentional systems that will foster equity and justice for many, many years to come. As I've mentioned, this will mean harnessing the power of research and education, but it will also mean turning to one another with open minds, with open ears, and with open hearts, and a willingness to take action together. We must draw on our strengths to build our further collegial community of scholars and help all rise to the challenge today and every day. We must do this in honor of those we are commemorating, and also for those who are beside us and on our campus here today. I now ask you to join me in a moment of silence for those who have been killed, for those who have given their lives, to reflect on what it really means when we say, Black Lives Matter. thank you for that minute of silence, for honoring those who have lost their lives. I'm forever grateful to the ongoing commitment of every student, staff, and faculty member to work together to make positive change. And I am most pleased now to invite to the podium our incoming Chancellor, Daniel Diermeyer.
Thank you very much, Interim Chancellor and Provost Wente. I join you and our Black students, faculty, staff, alumni, and community members in mourning Black lives brutally taken and in asserting that racism has no place at Vanderbilt or in our society at large. The last few weeks have been filled with horrific news as our nation has once again grappled with tragic killings and racial injustice. As I have been processing and discussing these events and thinking about today's memorial, several people have reminded me of an address that President Kennedy made to the nation in 1963. He gave this speech in response to the threats of violence on the campus of the University of Alabama following attempts of desegregation. Kennedy used his remarks to focus attention on the universal importance of human rights. Almost 60 years have passed, but Kennedy's profound words about civil rights still ring true today. He said, "A great change is at hand, and our task, our obligation, is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all." Vanderbilt has a responsibility, or to use Kennedy's words, an obligation, to continuously do the work to combat racism and racial injustice, both on our campus and throughout our community. Interim Chancellor Wente, Vice Chancellor Churchwell, and other leaders across this campus have been working for a long time to make Vanderbilt a more diverse and inclusive community. But we recognize that this work is never done and continue to ask ourselves, how can we do more? As a leading research university, we are uniquely positioned to answer these questions. First, we must create an inclusive community on Vanderbilt's campus. Universities like ours exist because of an unshakable belief in human potential. We must do whatever it takes to create an environment where students can learn and grow to their full potential, and where diverse faculty and staff can make our university stronger. In addition, we must step up our relationship to a broader community here in Nashville, across the region and beyond. The last few weeks have shown that we need to go beyond the core activities of teaching and research and ask ourselves, how can we drive tangible and lasting change in our society? How can we be a partner for change in addressing long-standing inequities around issues like healthcare, education, public safety, and economic opportunity? We have the academic expertise, platforms, and resources to spearhead research and test solutions that can have an impact far beyond our campus. We have to look at Nashville at large and ensure that we're engaging with and serving as a partner to our city and its people on issues that matter. The purpose of today's event is to honor the Black lives wrongly and violently taken. It is our duty to pause and to give these individuals and so many others the recognition and honor they deserve. But we know that this memorial must be followed by action. We know that words alone are not enough. I'm committed to working with our community and leveraging our unique strengths and resources as a research institution to take action. The answers are not quick and they're not easy, but finding them and mapping our next steps is urgent, and we will begin this work today. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.